In this short video, I'm going to talk about the mapping method of taking notes. Now, on the course, we've got 4 videos on different note-taking approaches, and this is one of them, the mapping method. So let's go through it and see what's here. It's a short video, so we'll try and keep it as short as we can. Mapping is a method that uses comprehension and concentration skills. And by that I mean it tries to join up ideas. So if you go to a lecture and the lecture is on a particular topic, we'll have several ideas, and as a student what you need to do is to join those ideas together in some logical form so that it's making sense. The lecture is making sense, and you know that one piece of information is connected to a different piece, which is connected to a different piece. So you're getting this picture of where the lecture is going. One part of the lecture following on from a different part, which is following on from a different part again. And that's what we call it the mapping method. It's mapping out where the lecture is going. It is developed in a note-taking form which relates each fact or idea to every other fact or idea. I say every other, well, in fact it may not link to every other, but it could do. So just to allow for the possibility of it linking to every other fact, I say it does. But what it is it's a set of ideas that the lecturer has given, or the class has given. As you study the class, there is a set of ideas. You take down the set of ideas and see how they're all connected, how they're related one to the other. It's a graphic representation of the content. It's a way of seeing the picture. There are downsides here. If the lecture is very long or complicated, you need to have a big enough piece of paper, because if you don't know at the start how many complications are going to arise in the lecture, your piece of paper might be too small, or your writing might be too big. On the other hand, if you make your writing small and there are very few points made, you're going to have to rewrite it to make it look nice as well. So it's a graphic representation. It's trying to show almost pictorially, except we're not using pictures, but it's trying to show, if you like, little boxes even, where one set of ideas are linked to another. It maximizes active participation. You've got to watch carefully and listen to the lecture very carefully to make sure you know each point and how each point is linked to every other point. It affords immediate knowledge as to understanding and emphasizes critical thinking. Well, you have to have critical thinking. You have to know, why does this go here? Does that link to that previous point, or does it link to the one before it? How are the lines linking these parts? How are they connected? So you have to listen to the lecture intensely so you know where everything fits. Now, the advantages of this method, well, it visually tracks the lecture. So when you got your piece of paper at the end of the lecture, what you will have is the theme of the lecture, and then lots of ideas in little boxes, if you like, with arrows pointing to them, and out of some boxes you'll have different boxes coming out of there. So you'll know that this point is related to other points, and you'll see the structure of the lecture visually. And it emphasizes the relationship between ideas and shows them very clearly. It shows how the ideas are linked. So it's a pictorial or a visual method of representing a lecture or a class. It's also easy to edit the notes by adding numbers. So you know the importance of the notes. You can put in a number and say, number 1 is very important. Number 2, not that important. Number 9, that's a very small point, but nonetheless it's there. And number 9 could link to number 8 and on to number 10. So you know where they go. In fact, here I said they could be color coded. If you're really interested, you could have little boxes and color certain points green and other points blue or whatever to show different streams of, and how the streams in the end come to a total perhaps. So you can be quite inventive with the technique. Now the disadvantages, well, the map may become very complex. And that's what I was saying to you earlier. It can become very, very complicated in the end. If you don't know how complicated the class is to start with, then your piece of paper might actually be too small. Or your handwriting might be too large, too big, and it doesn't accommodate all of the different points that are made. And some of your lines might be crossing other lines because you have no room. So it can become complex. The map can become very complex. You can use it in a lecture with a lecture content, and particularly if there's a lot of material in the lecture and it's well organized. But you'll have to know in advance that there is a lot of information in the lecture so that you are prepared to do your map so it will fit on the paper and it will contain all the points on the paper. So the lecture content, if it's a lot of material, this method is pretty good. But the material has to be well organized. Here's an example from economics. Now, the example I'm going to use here, economists will dispute this one. And the terminology I'm going to use and the concepts I'm going to use, economists will fight over it. I'm just using it to illustrate the mapping method. So we're not going to get involved in economics and the debate in economics about what's linked to what. Well, I'm just going to use words here to show how this works. So I'm going to start with the subject area. Now, if you're doing, let's say, a general degree in business, economics would be one, perhaps, subject. But you might have accountancy, marketing, human resource management, and so on. So you could imagine the degree as having lots of offshoots, one of which is economics. So the mapping method, if you're doing a degree or doing a diploma, might have many different different little boxes with concepts in there or with subjects in there, and economics would be one of them. But I'm going to start with economics there, and I'm going to say it's divided into two parts: microeconomics and macroeconomics. Now I'll keep saying, if an economist was here, he would or she would say that micro and macroeconomics, well, there's only one type. Macroeconomics doesn't really exist. Everything's microeconomics, and big debate would happen. Let's ignore all of that and say, okay, economics is divided into two. For the purposes of this exercise, it's divided into two. Just leave it at that. Right, so now I've got a picture here. Economics, two parts. At least my notes, let's say, as a student would be in two parts. I'm going to talk about macroeconomics. Now, macroeconomics is all about economic growth, inflation, unemployment, investment, balance of payments, exchange rates, taxation, government spending. All of these things come into macroeconomics. And I'm going to be interested in, let's say, in inflation. So now my mapping method takes me from economics to macroeconomics to inflation. Now I know inflation now is an economic concept because I've got it here on the diagram. I also know it's macroeconomics. It's not micro, it's macro. I've got it here. There's an arrow pointing down to it from macroeconomics. And now I'm saying it's split into two parts: cost push inflation and demand pull inflation. Two types of inflation. Again, if an economist was here, there would be a big dispute and say there is no such thing as cost push and everything's demand pull and so on. But let's leave that. Just for the purpose of this exercise, in mapping, I'm talking about the mapping method, let's just say there are two types of inflation. So now if somebody said to me, there is demand pull in the economy, I would think demand pull. Demand pull is inflation. Inflation is macroeconomics, which is a study of economics. So now my visual diagram is helping me to remember where all of the lines are going. So it's moving in that direction. And that's really the mapping method. That's all we need to know about it. You can see if there's a lot of information in the class, there'll be a lot of different boxes or different concepts on this piece of paper, and the arrows might become very complex and start to cross each other and overlap, and it could become very complex. And for that reason, it doesn't get a lot of publicity compared to, for example, the Cornell method or some of the others. But it is worth mentioning. It is there, and often in small cases where there's relative simplicity, it is possible to sit down and just draw the arrows like this, and you can see immediately where everything flows and where everything is connected. But if there's a lot of information, it might become too complex. So that's the mapping method. There's a lot online about it if you want to check it out further. But that's all I'm going to deal with here. So thank you for watching.